Okay. My name is Ramirez. This is an installment of FrogBear.zil where I look into curious cases in that relate to government, schools, and or exposing what this meme is talking about. I'm going to be posting this on all platforms because I feel the need to protect myself to some degree, because speaking about what I'm about to talk about, not very easy. Not very easy at all. So, aside from the meme, this all started off with me finding this video, some James O'Keefe stuff. So nothing
Hi.
normal.
Is this seat taken?
Yes.
Okay. By whom?
Someone will be here in about 1 minute.
That person works for me.
When she figures out the truth, when she's figuring out that, oh wait, have I been lied to this whole time? Now, what I wanted to just bring up here was the fact that I wanted to know who this lady was, and I saw that she is the Trinity School Director. So, for those who don't know, anytime the word Trinity is ever used in a school or a church, it's usually closely associated with a Jesuit order. So, I got curious, and I was like, all right, bet, is this related to anything related to the Jesuits? So, I looked into this lady. I just typed in Trinity School to see what I found. This is what I found. I also found out that the school was founded in 1709, and I also discovered that their colors are blue and gold. Does anybody remember what other buildings that were famous that were blue and gold? Either way, I didn't go that far. So I looked at the annual tuition and I was like, wow, it's $57,000 a year for your kids to get abused. Wow, quite expensive. But remember, this goes down to a theory that I brought up in my YouTube channel, where I bring up Devil Eye Build and how he treated his kids. And there's also plenty of studies that show that under certain conditions and certain circumstances, children will develop behavior, or at least some people are born with no frontal cortex, so there is no sympathy from them, and they view the world in a very non-emotional way. So a lot of that also gets inhibited as you're growing up because of the experiences that you grow up with, right? If somebody like Devil Eye Bill beats the living hope out of you, beats your sense of humanity out of you, and you trust no one, you end up like John McAfee, or you end up like Henry Ford, for examples. Not saying that it's bad or anything. So while looking into Trinity schools, I typed it in, and I found out that if you just, what was it? I clicked on their Wikipedia page, and their Wikipedia page, the picture's even funnier, right? The picture says, labor is virtue. Labor is virtue. And I was like, what the fuck? Well, I found out that Trinity School is a part of something called the Ivy League. Where is it? The Ivy League and other top schools. So they're a part of like this Ivy League preparatory league. So when I looked into it, I looked at it and I was like, all right, let's see what schools are a part of it. I mainly wanted to see where the schools were. And they're mainly in Manhattan, Westchester, Bronx, New York, Bronx, Manhattan, right? They had former schools. And in their former schools, I saw this school. I was like, wow, this is a beautiful building. And what really attracted me to clicking this school was the fact that just the building, just the fact that it looked like old school architecture. And you know about Tartaria, ancient civilizations, and the inconsistencies of how did they build these buildings at a time where there were no roads, only using a horse and carriage, is usually the MO. I looked into it, so I typed in St. Paul's School. I read some information about it. I also read that up until 2003, there was a consistent effort to try to rebuild this school and to try to renovate it, but it never went through. So I also kept just looking for more pictures of this place because I was very interested. It looks like a beautiful location. Very interesting architecture. Well, since then, this school's been closed down. Nobody's actually, from what I understand, this school has not been used at all. It used to be a boarding school where students would get to live on campus. But as it is now, the people that have purchased this building are the village residents, which I'm guessing is like some upper state neighborhood. Not entirely too sure. Didn't really care. What I wanted to find out was, why did this school close down? And what occurred? But in trying to look into the past, right? Because this school closed down in 1991. And in 1991, when this school closed down, Dr. Charles Hainsley Clark was kind of the last rector who was in charge of this school before it closed down. But kept looking. And then I found interesting things that relate to the newest school. So this is where I get into why I made this video. I'm making this video because during my time when I was on Discord, when I was on politics, and when I was constantly trying to figure out what was going on politically in the world, I met somebody who I consider a very dear friend. I haven't spoken to her since because of my poor judgment, but we were great friends. It's not like I did anything. It's just I failed to meet her expectations. But she told me very interesting things about when she was growing up in New York. I can't say the time period, but she would tell me how she was a targeted individual by certain boys at her school, and the teachers did nothing. And in most cases, the teachers kind of assisted in some of the behavior that was occurring. And I'm not going to say that it relates to this case. Not at all. I'm just saying that I dedicate this video to Zubs because at a time when you needed somebody there, I was still caught up in a bunch of my own drama. So I wasn't necessarily a good friend, just a good listener. And hopefully I could highlight some of the egregious shit that goes on in private schools. Because just because your school is private doesn't mean it's safe from this agenda, right? And this goes back to me showing the video of this woman who takes utter pleasure in knowing that she's subverting children.
At Project Veritas. Well,
here's the video.
And you're recorded making all these statements, even though I clearly am promoting agendas, and you're on tape, and you're saying, I don't hide how I feel, but I can't pretend I'm not promoting an agenda. You're recorded.
Right? She's secretly promoting an agenda. We like to believe that this country, our school system, our education system, our committee members, the people that we can trust with our children would do the right thing. But these are private schools. These are schools that are supposed to be held up to a higher standard. Just wait. Either way, I'm not going to get too into any of these cases because I have an article that I want to get to. But this is an email from some of the kids that were communicating with one another. One kid said, "Yo, F word. I know my Ivy frat boys are putting a target on her. She is going to get used and abused." The reply was, "Hope she gets a bit of desperately needed back door." And these are messages being sent from one student to another student. How one student is telling the older student, "Don't worry, I've already talked to even older students who used to go to this school at the Ivy League. Now she's got a target on her back. We're going to make sure that she gets what she deserves." Like, does nobody see the problem in this? And by the way, this case went nowhere. Either way, I don't want to focus on this case. Looked more into it, and then St. Paul School is in denial mode as blank trials begin, grape trials begin. So we're at a time where it matters about feminism, about grape, about all of these rights that women should have. Meanwhile, you have literal Ivy League prep schools that are hiding all of this shit. It gets better. Trust me, does it get better? So, looking into it, I found this guy. This is the guy who became the rector, the headmaster for St. Paul while this case was occurring. How do I know that? Because he later stepped down, and I can't read it. After an unusually painful time, St. Paul's school rector, Michael, to retire next month. And what was that painful experience that he had to deal with? By the way, you're only allowed to read 2 free stories on this website. Hilarious. I was baffled at this point, where I was just like, what the fuck am I watching, right? So I decided to look into who's been the rector here, right? This school goes as far back as 1855, right? Dr. Henry Augustus Coate was the first rector. And why I stopped at the 9th, was because he was the rector during the time that the original building closed, right? Which is this abandoned building. And the reason why I think this building is abandoned and not even open is because if you look at law, and if you look at how you're supposed to file some of this paperwork, how are some of the students who went to this school and suffered their abusers, how are they going to take them to court if this address isn't being used? Who are they going to take to court? You know what I mean? Like, essentially, who's going to fit the bill for all of the egregious shit that's happened? Either way. So I was looking into Dr. Charles Hainsley Clark, and the only real interesting thing that I found out was he's very revered. I can only find incredibly positive things that are said about this individual. So, oft administered. I was ecstatic on learning that Kelly and Priscilla had purchased the Daniel Abbott home in Little Pond Road, whatever. It was comforting to think their continued involvement in the community after his retirement as rector. I know that he worked with the Children's Alliance and on the board of the NEA New Hampshire, as well as continuing his missionary work with a group in China. Okay. I couldn't find much on this guy, like at all, right? Finding anything right now past the year 2005 gets incredibly difficult on the internet. But either way. So I just kept looking. Were there any controversies at St. Paul's? I discovered a man named Stephen Douglas Hogg. Stephen Douglas Hogg, a former classics and a housemaster of the school, was arrested and charged with the abuse of a number of his choristers during the 1980s. Keep these dates in mind. Following his attempted Epsteining during the initial stages of his proceedings in October 2008. If you don't know when the Epstein case happened, it's kind of around the same time. The 50-year-old Douglas Hogg changed his plea halfway through and admitted to a plea halfway through the trial and admitted to 13 counts of indecent assault on 5 boys under the age of 14. On May 2009, he was arrested 4.5 years. Yeah, they say all this, but he actually got off scot-free. The case was dropped. He got to walk a free man. But either way, moving on from that. Oh yeah, here it is. Abuse case against Stephen Douglas Hogg is dropped. Interesting. So we keep going on. Then I kept looking. St. Paul's Cathedral schoolmaster abused of boys and created an atmosphere of latent whatever. The schoolmaster sexually abused his pupils, blah, blah, blah. This is Stephen Douglas Hogg. More pictures of this dude. Either way, there was someone else that I found. This guy. Former St. Paul's teacher arrested on corn charges. And this is Christopher Wheeler taught music and spelling at the former boys' school in Garden City in 1980s. I was like, okay, these are 2 cases. Maybe I can't find anything else, right? And I'm like, okay, this has gone far enough. I think I've already found everything that I could find. And then around looking for more, I found out that John Kerry was considered a teen outcast at this school. And I'm like, okay. At this point, I was just mulling together what I knew about St. Paul's. And to me, well, actually, I haven't gotten to that article yet because I found it later. But what I found in this article was not that interesting, but just the way that it's described. Because you have to remember, the people at the top, politicians, leaders, they actually care about what's written about it. And something interesting that I found was, today the meal ended. The class president, a Boston lawyer named Lloyd McDonald, rose to give a toast. He wanted to celebrate his classmates who had devoted their careers to public service. Okay, interesting. Keep in mind, right, his classmates who devoted their careers to public service. As he ticked off the names, FBI Director Robert Mueller, the State Department's top lawyer, Will Taft, Federal Judge Alvin A. Schall, the shenanigans bathed the room in loud applause, right? Everybody's like, yeah. But when McDonald uttered the name of a junior senator from Massachusetts, the response became somewhat different. According to witnesses, everyone broke out in boos. Boos broke the silence. Kerry didn't leave boarding school a popular man. 42 years after the fact, many of his classmates still mock him. How does that make sense? Like, unless the people that are mocking him are above status of John Kerry. But that makes more sense in the next article. They chide him for being a teacher's pet and a selfish hockey player. They chide him for being a teacher's pet. Keep in mind that Kerry was in the class of 62. None of this became very public until the 80s. Then I find my last article, which is Vanity Fair, a private school affair. Now, let's read how this school is described. One of America's most prestigious boarding schools, St. Paul's, has been hit by scandal after scandal over the past few years. Financial improprieties, the ouster of its highly paid rector, a hazing investigation, a drowning in its new $24 million fitness center, and allegations of abuse by revered teachers. The author returns to its 2,000 acre Concord, New Hampshire campus to learn how hubris, stonewalling, and information revolution divided through never conquered his alma mater. Whatever. This just describes the school. This is a really prestigious school. Like, only top people get to go here. Like, this article really details out what kind of people end up going here. And it's only the rich, it's only the elite, right? If Trinity School was $50,000 a year, you can only imagine what this school was like at its heyday, because this article gets way too trippy for me. Either way, skipping most of this. All of it's prompted investigation, Attorney General's office, right? They're getting audited by the IRS. They're getting investigated for the youngster who drowned in the pool. And articles eventually New York Times. Not good for the old image, especially when you are competing for top students against other well-endowed institutions, such as New Hampshire's Phyllis Exeter Academy, Connecticut's Cote Rosemary Hall, Massachusetts' Gordon School, Phillips Academy and Dover, and Milton Academy, not to mention the excellent private day schools and public schools that are attracting a growing number of high-performing teenagers. Right? It's already describing that this school has to already compete with these other top schools in the area. The embarrassing spot on the school tie was painfully fresh when a days into 2004-2005 school year, 15th, 6th form seniors, girls, were suspended for hazing some of the new girls. A culture of hazing, a culture of, in order for you to be in part of the in-group, you need to do certain things. This sort of stature and this sort of status and this sort of hazing gets worse. The worst thing that happened was that some of the younger girls were forced to simulate fellatio on bananas. Not that big of a deal, right? But compared with the 15-year-old girls at Milton Academy who performed oral activities to 5 members of their school's hockey team in succession a few months later. What? Right? Like, not only was it just on bananas, but the other school, the other prestigious school, went so far as actually letting these girls do it. And if any of these, actually, I'll just keep going. I'll just keep going. Compared with the students of Northfield Mount Hermon School in Massachusetts, who had the word homo carved into their back, carved into his back by 2 jocks in 1999, or with the freshman football player at McGill University in Montreal, who got probed in the rear with a broomstick during a hazing ceremony. But the banana incident violated New Hampshire's hazing law, and it had to be reported to the police. Gordon's trustees, different school, had gotten into hot water a few years earlier for trying to keep a lid on its abuse allegations. What the fuck's going on in New York? I don't even know where. Whatever. November 7th, only 5 weeks after the school's monumental new $24 million gym and its fitness center opened, a boy in the 4th form, 10th grade, drowned in its Olympic-sized swimming pool. Either way. The 4th element of St. Paul's calamity had been incubating for years. The allegations from the late 1940s through the early 90s, dozens of the school's masters as the teachers were known until women joined the faculty in 1972. It's a very important year, by the way, including several revered ones, had molested students. This gets so much worse. And we're not even at the full article yet. I'm only going to read the highlighted parts at this point. My interest peaked. And by the way, I want to mention this immediately. This author is not meant to be trusted. Because if you just read how this dude ends this, right? Where is it? Maybe they would think twice before ripping off 3 feet of toilet paper once they found out that 1 million acres of old growth boreal forest in northern Alberta are being grounded up every year to make that stuff. Why not have the kids follow the money trail, find out how the money coming into the schools was made and in exactly what sort of instruments the endowment is invested? Have them look into how much of the oblivious hyperconsumption taking place not just here but across America is made possible by back-breaking labor of millions of third world peasants. How many ecosystems are being degraded and destroyed by our way of life? Get the kids to print their homework on both sides of the page. Case their dorms for energy leaks and take quick showers and be grateful that the water is hot. This dude's basically written this whole thing in a format that's like, you should be grateful that this world is the way it is because of us. Like, you shouldn't care about the sort of weird shit that's going on at St. Paul's. How about you care about how many trees are being used? Either way, this article came out in 2009, so let's be fair. Either way, my interest peaked because I knew many of the players, including one of the most notorious of the accused masters, who is now living in disgrace in another state. At least I thought I knew him. He had never come on to me. But I remember them as good men. and it gets worse, right? Because here it says, and I knew the head of the board of trustees, Jim, because we'd grown up together in Bedford in the 50s. Both of them had taken office after their predecessor resigned in June. We hadn't seen one of them in years, but I remembered them as good men. So all of them were fucked. All of these dudes were bad. All of them. I really wish I could say that. No, there are some good. No. Has no. All of them are bad people. Had stepped down the investment, governance with the state AG, whatever. The New England prep school world of 40 to 50 years ago is a small one. You can quantify the graduating classes. I had written the history of 2 other private schools attended by my 5 sons over the years, St. George School of Montreal and Ripple One Sisqua School in Bedford, New York, so I knew that schools are fascinating microcosms. They act out what is happening in society at large. Keep that in mind. They act out what is happening in society at large, because this becomes relevant later. As the parent of a former student told me, after I started writing about the crisis and the repercussions, everything that happened at St. Paul's is symptomatic of what our society has become. Moving on. The central part of campus, weird number, but as the classmate of mine who hails from one of the nation's oldest families told me, the way he describes the people that he gets quotes from in this article are all blue blood. Like, these are actual aristocrats. Like, these are actual people that got to see what a life of status and what a life of riches really is. Because it's just through and through again. Those who give like the idea of their kids and grandkids going there, but this has been a problem since the late 80s, when the school turned into some kind of hothouse that only the creme de la creme can get into anymore. Either way. Because this, either way. No, I shouldn't say that. Summertime, autumn leaves, da-da-da. Just want to make sure that I don't miss anything. Reports to the treasurer. Good morning. Our return is higher than any of the endowment out there. Report to the new treasurer. Jim Hopkinson's boards of trust. Because they've mentioned a lot of the people that are involved in this investigation. Anderson later tells me he is constrained by the IRS audit from saying how much he is paying back. Anderson is one of the previous headmasters, and one of the things that the headmasters, all of them, came into question over was how much they were getting paid for a yearly salary. It wasn't necessarily known how much they were actually being paid. He says that the $300,000 in the 80s, $300,000 figure is wrong, but won't say whether the actual number is more or less. Robinson and I have known each other since we were kids. In the summer of 1963, my father and I took him and another boy to climb a small mountain called Les Diablerites, the Little Devils, near Villars, Switzerland. Weird to mention that. Either way. Something one of the members of 69 would later complain in a mass email. Much is being said lately, but by the board of leadership about clearing the air and restoring trust. That's a different thing to accomplish when many are still on board who signed unanimous declarations of support for Anderson and managed to heap praise on themselves at the same time. A boatload of trust would return quickly and much air clear if the board members would demonstrate their sincerity by resigning. There's really no other way to clean break with the past. Either way, there's a lot of talk about new blood. All right, there's a lot of talk about getting new blood on the 23-member board, but it already seems to be somewhat diverse. And welcome to diversity tactics, right? Just because, well, he's black, she's Asian, clearly we have another, whatever. In addition to the classic WASPs. For those who don't know what a WASP is, those are the white people that are not accepted by the older echelons. Like the real aristocrats, the real people of power, they call anyone who's not a part of their circle or part of their bloodlines WASPs. Undesirable. In addition to classic WASPs such as Robinson and Lindsay, right, calling them a WASP straight to their face in this article, there's an African-American judge who serves as the clerk and a Jewish New York investment banker who heads the audit committee. There are also Sabrina Fung and a Nigerian-born doctor, could not say that name, as well as Trinka Taylor of Dallas, originally from Midland, and a dear friend of the president's. And there is Julie Frist, a relative of Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, who is under investigation for dumping his stock in HCA Inc., a company his father helped found. You know, some people say that the DJ Vlad has a lot of people that snitch on themselves. I'm reading this article and I'm like, bro, you're snitching on yourself. Lindsay tells the room that the view that the trustees were enriching themselves is not true. This will be confirmed a few days later by Harold, the investment banker, blah, blah, blah. There was nothing that was a chargeable offense or even close to it, right? It wasn't just the headmaster. But apparently, a lot of people were double dipping into the funds because a lot of the people that end up going to St. Paul's ended up getting really good positions in government, in Wall Street, essentially getting positions of power that paid really well. So when the school would call asking for donations, they were more than willing to keep on giving. But that's the willingness part of it. But let's not even talk about the people who get groomed into these situations. George Baker had been managing the endowment for 25 years with very little oversight. He had invested in more than 50 instruments. Essentially, now they're saying that, we were investing into trust funds. We were investing into the stock market. We were investing into trust and all this other stuff. That's why many of them hedge funds and private venture capital firms. So the money was very difficult to track. It wasn't so much what they were doing, but the way that they were doing it. Money laundering. Legally. Reached his investment firm in New York. Baker confirms that he ran the endowment committee almost single-handedly from the late 70s to 2005 and had pretty much carte blanca because few trustees were trained in business, he adds. Those were simpler times. But here's the funny thing, right? During this period, Baker says, he grew the endowment sixfold and shielded it from the dot-com bust that clobbered many other schools. How'd you know that? How did you know to avoid the dot-com bubble? Because realistically, not that many people saved themselves from that. That was a catastrophic event. Moving on. Anderson. Limited to Anderson, entitled The Climate Change. But the judge in terms, whatever. All right, Sharon Hennessy. Indefinite sabbatical. Hennessy, whose salary also nearly doubled in 8 years. She was there and whose perk included a membership at the Canyon Ranch Spa, which reportedly cost $20,000 to $30,000 a year, and an annual trip to pedagogical conference in Canyons, was not charged with any wrongdoing, but after she left, the position of vice rector was abolished. Okay, if there was nothing wrong with your position, then why'd you have it closed when you left? The chain begins in the fall of 1974, when a revered teacher named Lawrence Katzebank, I don't even know, who's under Nicholas, he's a headmaster, had been Deputy Attorney General under President Kennedy. Interesting. Allegedly dropped his trousers and exposed his member to a senior girl at the school who was babysitting his newborn baby. His wife was in the hospital, says the victim, who would rather not be named. He said, "Come on, touch it." Oh my God, this reminds me of the Biden thing of, come on, slick it. Deeply traumatized for years, the woman was unable to tell anybody until the 25th year reunion. So again, what happened to feminism, bro? What happened to actual real feminism talking about how, a woman matters and that we need to take these situations super seriously? And I'm literally looking at this like, what the fuck, dude? None of these people came forward. None of them came forward at this time. Interesting, right? Because everybody else was coming forward, but yet people who actually have allegations to levy don't want to come forward. Instead, we get some bullshit like Justice Kavanaugh from some nerd who didn't even ever go to any of the parties. Like, come on. Ursa Holloman, not a screenwriter, now a screenwriter in LA. Why did I say not? I was leaning in the lawn with the victim, right? So the screenwriter was the first person that this victim told. I was stunned. I took modern novel with Mr. Kassenbach or whatever, and he was one of the best teachers I had at SPS. So we started talking, and we remembered that another teacher had a bad reputation as an abuser. And there he was on prominent display right there at the anniversary. I'm like, bro, so the dude who was, right, the people that abuse the most are the people that get praised the most, right? Go back to John Kerry. Why did they applaud for John Kerry, but why did they not applaud for the other person? The teacher in question, who had never been charged with any crime, had worked at the school for decades. By 2000, he was retired, but still involved with the school and was one of its best regarded masters. Oh, what a great guy. I'm joking. Don't take me seriously. Eventually, the group gathered allegations of abuse by 29 masters over a 50-year period, including 5 who were still active in the early 60s when I was there, right? The 60s. Who was there in the 60s? Who was called the teacher's pet? Oh, look. This pains me, all right? This pains me to no avail, but, ugh. Many who are abused have their boundaries violated already, Holloman adds. Predators can smell a victim. As its 25th-year reunion gift, the class of 1975 gave a sizable amount of money for boundary training for the faculty and other measures to enhance the security of its students. These have been implemented according to Dean Dale, but boarding schools attract abuses from adults. But the fact that, I don't know, I always think that the fact that the building is abandoned weirds me out. Because we all know what happens in abandoned buildings. We all know why these people would want to keep that building abandoned. If you're not privy to that, well then I don't know what the fuck to tell you, because you have a building that has rooms, a church where you can do rituals, and probably underground levels that nobody knows about. So, I don't know. You can imagine why I'm very adamant in not believing this. Over the years, at least one of its staff members suspected to be preying on its students at St. Paul's was dismissed, but the administration didn't implement a zero-tolerance policy until the early 1990s. Oh, you mean the year that the school closed down? Wow. A 30-page exchange detailing her frustrated attempts to get answers to her questions was posted on an alumni website, and she soon resigned from the parents' committee. Who was this? Oh, yeah. This was, Shannon's husband. Okay, yeah, so that Shannon lady. She was trying to do an audit, and she was trying to figure out what was going on. Using the internet, she pulled up St. Paul's statements, as well as those as Andover, Exeter, Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts, and noticed that St. Paul's $30 million plus annual budget that Shannon says were not in those of the other schools, such as $932,000 for legal fees, $3,909,000 for other. The school explained that there had been an error in filling out the forms, but that the problem had been subsequently addressed, according to, right? So she's all like, you're not giving me straight answers. I'm not about to be the fall guy for all of these taxes going wrong. So she was like, look, explained her frustrations, posted on the website, and then she soon resigned from the parents' committee. Then she really started digging. Another alumni started an online chat forum that detailed out all sorts of damaging revelations and allegations, which sped around the alumni and ultimately reached the media. At that point, the momentum leading forward to the downfall of Anderson and Hennessy and the executive committee was unstoppable. As my old blue-blooded classmate reflected, you starting to understand this? Because I'm going to talk to the BitChute people. Y'all niggas need to wake the fuck up. Like, it's your own kind doing this to you. A school administration used to be able to handle the news, but now there are blogs and cell phones that spread rumors, and the school has to react. The ability to keep information private is gone, and that is really hard for the administration of the school. Something happened at St. Paul's one night at 11 o'clock. I don't remember what it was, but there was an accurate account of it in the Andover student newspaper the next morning. God, I'd hate to be a headmaster and have to wake up every morning wondering, what have these little fuckers done now? It wasn't us. It wasn't the faculty. We had nothing to do with this. It was the students who did this. We should let boys be boys. You realize how this language can be used in the wrong way? Either way, moving on. As another classmate told me, there's probably more bad stuff to be uncovered, but nothing really salacious. People would prefer to let sleeping dogs lie as long as they don't become rabid again. What the fuck, dude? Okay. It gets so much worse. Nevertheless, St. Paul's was beginning to resemble the St. Midas School, the most expensive and the most exclusive boys' preparatory in the world. Okay. St. Midas School, the most expensive and the most exclusive boys' preparatory in the world. And this is a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald's 1992 short story. Either way, moving on, and this is Then they mention Nelson. And this is the guy that says St. Midas ordeal. One observer said of its recent scandals, St. Paul's has always been a melange of church and money won out because the church is dying. Now this relates to a conspiracy theory that suggests that after the fall of the Soviet Union and after the fall of Stalin, one of his great ideas was to destroy the Catholic Church from the inside out. It was to destroy the faith that people had in the church, destroy the faith that people had moralistically, in order to create the initial steps into pushing away people from faith, pushing people away from religion. And this article will prove that. Just give me a minute. Gary Studs, who later became a congressman, led to the relaxation. Okay, yeah. Right? At the end of the 60s, going into the 70s, this guy shows up, Gary Studs. He became a congressman later, too. Led to a relaxation of dress code and the administration of girls in the early 70s. It went from being an only boys' school to now a boys and girls' school. But don't forget, this is a boarding school. This is a boarding school where they live together. The new secular rector, William Oates, espoused the prevailing educational and developmental thinking of the day, that schools should not be repressive, and that adolescents should be free to experiment and try out different identities. Should I reread that again? Should I reread that again for the people that think that I grew up in the heyday? I grew up in the glory days. Yeah, you did. But the people that got into the positions of power, that's not the experience they had. They had a completely different experience. And that's why when you look at the agendas that are being promoted against you, promoted against everybody, you'd realize that this is where it all starts. These are the people who get to maintain power. These are the people who have signatures that get things done. These are the people that come from families of prestige, of nobility, of whatever the fuck you want to call that bullshit. But either way, just reread it one more time. that schools should not be repressive, and that adolescents should be free to experiment and try out different identities. In the 80s, an impressive performing arts center was built, and the school became more artsy. Should I reopen up the article that says that the CIA was using art to influence people? Should I bring that up, or should I just keep moving on? All right, cool. Thanks to the Manchester airport and the improved interstate system, the school was no longer so remote and tucked away. And now that greed was good, the school had an enormous ability to raise money and scour the country and find the best and brightest kids. Should I reread that again? The school had an enormous ability to raise money and to scour the country to find the best and brightest kids. Does that remind anybody of anything? To keep up with the rival prep schools, monumental building projects were undertaken, architecture that will one day be seen as late imperial climax of the consumer culture. By the mid 80s, however, the board was getting alarmed that the students were out of control. Whoa. And the faculty had too much leeway, so they brought in David Hicks, the headmaster of a day school in Dallas called St. Mark's, to tighten things up. And this is where it gets good. Recalls, one of the mandates I was given was to improve the quality, improve academics. Nobody had gone to Harvard in 5 years, except for legacies. Now, very interesting that they experienced a very big portion of time that they weren't having students go into Harvard. These are Ivy League preparatory schools. These are schools meant to prepare you to go into Ivy Leagues. So when he's brought in, nobody had gone to Harvard in 5 years except for legacies. I wonder who those legacies are. I was also mandated to get control of the student behavior. The students were polled, 80% of them, they were using drugs. It was very obvious to anyone who was walking around the school on a Saturday night, and that many of them were under the influence of something. It was the 80s. What do you think it was? On my watch, some prospective parents from Philadelphia walked into the student center and found a boy and a girl having intercourse on the couch. Very prestigious school in the late 80s, I see. The original parents of the Gilded Age, right? The original parents of the Gilded Age, who knew what it was like out there, wanted their children to be hardened, not spoiled. So what happened? What occurred? Why did the school go from suddenly being hella prestigious to not being so prestigious? What occurred? Were they trying to control something? Were they making a deliberate effort into making sure that nobody else graduated from that school in a fashion that was redeemable in society's eyes? Because you have to remember, how much are they paying per year at the school? And at the beginning of the article, they said that even after the 60s, this became a school where only the best of the best went to school at. But by the time I got there, silly sadistic ideas encouraged them to think that they were something special, that the rules didn't apply to them, and that was not good. The kids would have been better off in a more meritocratic environment. I don't even know what that word is. This was the test bed, in my opinion. If there was a school that was used to then mimic that same behavior everywhere else in America, because reading this from the 80s tells me that what I saw growing up in school started with this culture. In 1996, he published the article. No, in 1996, who published this article? Oh, David Hicks, the American scholar. The Strangest Fate of American Boarding School. The Strange Fate of the American Boarding School. It includes the thought-provoking passage. Although the old moneyed families still exert a considerable influence and control over their alma maters, they often do so in ways that reflect their own social and financial insecurities. To some extent, the selfishness born of mounting social and financial anxieties among these class had caused the boarding school to do what it has often been accused of doing, but now with more reason, namely to serve private rather than public interest. This may seem to increase its appeal, but it also undermines its integrity and contributes to its destruction. Hicks was suggesting that the moral slippage at the school was related to the decadence of the old WASP establishment. Should I read that one more time for the WASP listening on BitChute? Hicks was suggesting that the moral slippage of the school was related to the decadence of the old WASP establishment, as in the aristocrats who originally wanted to keep you in your place and made sure they only taught you well enough, or were still exerting influence over all of these schools. One can certainly draw a parallel with what is happening to the country as it's entered the era of Enron. But it wasn't the old money that was greedy. At the extent to which the old WASP establishment is actually declining is also questionable. Oh, well, whatever. They weren't greedy. And to assume that we did anything to these people. Either way. Now they're talking about the person who replaced Hicks. So when Hicks couldn't actually do anything, they hired Bishop Anderson. Bishop Anderson, here you go. Ooh. Now, physically, he was the rector from the central casting, and an exceedingly handsome man, square-jawed, great smile, and knew how to wear the meter and had a closet full of the most splendid vestments in the church. Interesting. He was the most narcissistic man who had ever come to the school, a teacher told me. The nurses in the infirmary, which is right next to the rectory, used to watch him primping in the upstairs bathroom for a half hour before morning chapel. This is a quote from Anderson. Yes, I did shower and shave every morning, but I hope this could be seen as good hygiene, Anderson says. A parent of a former student found the bush very glossy like a used car salesman. He had risen to bishop in South Dakota and then became the head of the General Theological Seminary in New York City. There, he had performed expensive renovations on his residence, and that was one of the first things he did at St. Paul's after the school hired him away. The rectory was built in 1872, Anderson explains, and the renovations was almost all structural, not cosmetic. That's part of running the institution. So you telling me that this shady ass dude renovated both of his homes? What did he do? Did he install something? Like, I don't actually. I just found it weird that they mentioned that in this article. But Anderson arrivals coincided with tanking of the dot-com boom, and money became harder to raise. In an effort to cut costs, the board let go long-time staff and adjusted benefits to the children of the faculty. No one seemed to realize that implementing such measures would, when the rector and the vice rector were still getting whopping salaries, was bound to create resentment. Right? So he cut everybody else. He's like, I'm gonna cut this, I'm gonna cut this, I'm gonna cut this, but I'm not cutting my salary. What the fuck? These were the IRS stuff that it's being detailed. Let's see. Oh yeah. The one thing that I did find interesting was this. I'd been married to a WASP family for 25 years. This article is weird, and I've seen the power of politeness and repression, but for stiff upper lip, this really took the cake. A lot of kids were wearing a t-shirt that said, I heart the bish. So, the general sense I got was that wherever Anderson's pecadillos the kids really loved him and were in rebellious mood that he had been shown the door. Pecadillos. I don't know how that word basically means little sins, tiny little sins. Essentially, this dude's suggesting that Anderson was essentially bribing the kids with like little gifts, just little things that would put the kids on his side. Here we have enthusiastic supernovas, talking about the telescope. The administration, the school is rock solid as far as the mission goes. Oh yeah, talking about what the initial mission of the school was. Okay, yeah. Here's where it gets even weirder. When I asked how they liked the school, they invariably said it was awesome, and who wouldn't feel the same way? How many high schools have a harpsichord and a corps de ballet? I jammed with a fleck, a new category of student since my time, who might be described as a later day hippie or freak. Flex, the word is derived from frolic, and really into the Grateful Dead. This frolic had a head on his shoulders. He was an excellent musician and had already recorded a CD. His plan was to move to New York and get into the music business. Why did I read that? I don't even remember. Either way. I had lunch with Ike Perkins, the son of some filmmaking friend of mine and a great nephew of Maxwell Perkins, the fabled editor of Ernest Hemingway's F. Scott Fitzgerald and Thomas Wolfe. Weird. But again, blue bloods. Again, like these are the actual people at the top. Cousins, He had kids there. A fifth graduation, Paulie, who graduated last year, told me that there's a lot of action going on in the school, but it's all safe. Apparently, most students are wise enough to choose condoms over disease and unwanted pregnancy. Either way, there are still preps, like the one in my class who used to turn over your tie and snicker if the label wasn't Brooks Brothers. Most of the preps live in the Simpson house. Yet, the preppiest ones are not the old line kids, many of whom are not preppy at all, a student told me, but the wannabes who have new money. Basically describing that, who knows, this was probably the same case when new money came around. But I largely believe that these schools were destroyed from the 70s to the 80s to destroy new money. And specifically the new money that rose from the 50s and the 60s. And after the dot-com bubble, well, you already know where that would go. But it points out that all of the kids who are born into the old money lines, they're not even that preppy at all. But the kids who are the preppiest are the ones that are trying to fit in. And they're also the wannabes, quote unquote, which I thought was funny. What's my time? I think I might end it here. I don't know what else to say. I was not expecting to make this sort of video. I was not expecting to find any of this information at all. Do I want to be the face of this? Fuck no. This shit puts my life in danger because I'm talking about the top of the top. I'm talking about the people that actually, like, it's not that their position is designed for them, but they're around people who will eventually also get these other positions. So it comes down to that thing of, if you go to a job interview and you know that the person hiring was somebody who used to be at a frat house and you both recognize that you're frat brothers, you're more likely to get the job than somebody who's actually more qualified than you. Just because you went to the same frat house, just because you experienced the same things. So when I look at the fact that John Kerry, who to this day was very relevant, goes to this school, is hazed the way he's hazed, and he has other kids belittling him as he's somebody who's as important as he is, a member of Skull and Bones, somebody who got to sit at the Bush cabinet, somebody who then got to work at the Obama administration. If this isn't adding up, I don't know what will. Because at the end of the day, all of these people hanged out with each other. They all went to the same schools. They all got to interact with each other when they were kids. So when they're adults, what do you think is going to happen? Who do you think is going to look out for who? Where do you think these allegiances are going to lie? With the public or with someone that you knew would abuse of you when you were in high school or when you were in middle school or when you were still stuck in these co-ed dorms? These are things we have to quantify to some degree. Beyond that, I'm going to leave it here because this got way too long for me. My name is Ramirez, and hopefully I don't have to do another long-ass episode like this because this is not my wheelhouse.